hiker vanishes for 36 hours in the Tatra Mountains. Aired when he returns, he describes meeting men dressed in 19th century clothing, a wooden shelter that disappeared overnight, and terrain that doesn't match modern maps. But here's what makes this story absolutely chilling. 150 years earlier, a French explorer documented meeting a man in bright orange clothing with thunderlight technology on the exact same mountain pass. Most people who hear about strange experiences in the mountains chalk them up to altitude sickness, dehydration, or simple disorientation. The conventional wisdom is straightforward. If you can't explain it, you probably just got confused out there. Weather changes fast. Trails look different than you remember. Your brain plays tricks when you're exhausted. Case closed, right? But what happens when the evidence doesn't fit that neat little box? What happens when you find historical documentation that corroborates impossible details from a modern hiker's experience? What if the confusion isn't coming from inside the hiker's mind, but from something far stranger happening in the mountains themselves? This isn't about paranormal speculation or wild theories. This is about two documented accounts, separated by 150 years, that describe the same impossible encounter from opposite sides. One man thought he'd met the devil. The other thought he'd stumbled into the past. In this video, I'm going to walk you through one of the most disturbing and well-documented cases of what researchers call a time slip, an alleged temporary overlap between different time periods. We'll examine the hiker's account step by step. Then I'll show you the historical text that shouldn't exist. We'll compare the details, look at what can and can't be explained, and explore why the Tatra Mountains might be a hotspot for these kinds of anomalies. The hiker's account was documented just a few years ago. The historical text, written by Count Henry Russell in 1861, describing his expedition to the Tatras with a legendary local guide named Clemens Bachelder. The fragment was discovered in a used bookshop in Leipzig, Germany, part of a damaged book describing Russell's 16,000-mile journey across Asia and Oceania. Here's what Russell wrote. A man was hurtling down the slope, bouncing on each possible rock. He was wearing curious orange clothes, so bright that it hurt the eyes. He took something out of his pocket, from which a white fire went out. The man spoke for few seconds alone to his fire. He shouted few words in a language I could not understand, and looked at me with a sadistic smile before he disappeared. I did not want to scare my friends, so I did not tell them I met the devil. Let's begin. Picture this. It's a Friday evening, sometime in September, just a few years ago. A man more, let's call him our protagonist, because his real identity hasn't been publicly confirmed, is driving at full speed toward the Polish Tatras. He's had a brutal week at work. He's had a brutal week at work. He tried calling friends to join him, but everyone was busy. No matter. He needs the mountains. He needs to escape. He arrives at Rosa Polana, a border crossing area, pays for parking through Sunday night, and starts hiking in darkness. Phone off. No plan, no reservation, just walking to clear his mind. Here's the first detail that matters. He specifically remembers arriving at a place called Horolegike, Taborisko pod Visoko, a wooden structure where hikers are known to bivouac. He's been there before. He knows what it looks like. Exhausted, he falls asleep in his sleeping bag. When he wakes up the next morning, the wooden structure is gone. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone, completely vanished. He's lying in open grass where a building stood the night before. Now pause for a second, and put yourself in his position. You wake up outdoors, which you expected, but a building you distinctly remember sheltering near has disappeared. What's your first thought? Drop a comment below. Would you immediately panic, or would you try to rationalize it like our hiker did? Because his first instinct was to convince himself he'd been mistaken in the dark. Maybe he was so tired he imagined it. Maybe he confused it with something else. But that rationalization was about to get much harder to maintain. The weather forecast had promised clear skies. One of the last beautiful weekends of the year, remember. Instead, he wakes up to thick mist. Not just any mist. Completely unpredicted fog that obscures everything. He starts hiking up Bielovodska Valley, a route he knows well, but nothing looks right. The trail is wrong. Instead of the wide, well-maintained path, marked with abundant TANAP signage. That's the Tatra National Park. He's on a narrow single track. The markers are missing. The vegetation has overgrown everything. And then he sees the snow. The higher peaks are covered in fresh snow. Not old snow from months ago. Fresh snow. Snow he definitely didn't see the evening before. Snow that wasn't in any forecast. Snow that shouldn't be there. He's starting to feel disoriented. But the weather improves. The sun comes out. He reaches the pass at Polski Harabeng and decides to descend the other side toward a mountain hut called Slierski Dom, where he plans to spend the night. And this is where things get truly strange. He's been hiking for hours. It's a weekend in the Tatras during perfect weather, or what was supposed to be perfect weather. These mountains are popular. Even on a regular day, you'd expect to see dozens of other hikers. He hasn't seen a single person. He checks his phone. No signal. But it's worse than that. The phone's clock has malfunctioned. It's showing 0 o'clock hours on January 1st, 1900. Complete reset. It's battery issue, he tells himself. Moisture from the overnight humidity. And then finally, he sees other people. 4 men, heavily loaded with equipment, dressed in dark clothing, moving slowly toward the pass. He's relieved. He'll ask them about the trail, maybe figure out where he went wrong. But as he gets closer, relief turns to confusion. These aren't modern hikers. One man is clearly ahead of the others. He's wearing old leather boots, tartan trousers, a leather jacket, and carrying a rucksack that looks like it's from another century, entirely. Our hiker calls out greetings in Slovak, then Polish, then German. He just stares with deep suspicion and says nothing. Before we continue with what happened next, I want you to think about this. How would you explain what's happening at this point? Comment below with your theory so far. And don't skip ahead, because what comes next makes it so much weirder. Our hiker is disturbed by the encounter, but he does what most of us would do, rationalizes. Maybe the guy's just a historical reenactor. Maybe he's doing some kind of period hiking challenge. People do weird things in mountains, right? He's disappointed by the unfriendliness. But he moves on. The fog returns, thick and disorienting. The trail becomes more and more invisible. He's walking through what he describes as a blind landscape of grass and gray atmosphere. He's now certain he's lost the path. He wanders like this for over an hour. Then suddenly, papers please. A TANAP ranger appears out of nowhere. He's wearing the official uniform, the famous red fleece with the Edelweiss symbol. The ranger is checking him for hiking off-trail, which is forbidden in the park. This is significant. The ranger is clearly modern. Normal uniform, normal equipment, normal interaction. Our hiker explains he's lost, shows his nationality, and the ranger, taking pity on his situation, points him to the proper trail just 100 meters below, and lets him off without a fine. 1 hour later, our hiker arrives at Slierski Dom, the mountain hut. It's suddenly full of normal, noisy, colorful people. His phone works again. He has 3 text messages from his wife asking where he is. Everything is back to normal. He spends Saturday night at the hut. Sunday is a perfect hiking day. Brilliant weather exactly as forecasted. He hikes through Vika Studena Dolina and returns via Prialum. It's beautiful, unremarkable, completely normal. He goes home. The trip becomes just another entry in his mental logbook. A bit weird with the weather and getting lost. Sure, but nothing he dwells on. until several months later, when he and his wife take a trip to Germany. They're visiting Leipzig, which is famous for being the second-hand book capital of Germany, possibly all of Europe. While his wife shops for clothes, our hiker wanders into an Alpine bookhandlung, an Alpine bookshop. The shelves are filled with old, yellowed, musty books. The vendor is a suspicious-looking old man with glasses. He directs our hiker to a corner with international literature, mostly in English. And there, our hiker sees a name, Count Henry Russell. If you know mountaineering history, that name should ring bells. Russell was a famous 19th century explorer and mountaineer, particularly known for his obsessive love of the Pyrenees. But what would Russell have to do with the Tatras? The book is damaged, just a fragment, maybe 20 pages starting somewhere past page 100. The shopkeeper has no idea where it came from or what the complete book was. Our hiker starts reading. It's from Russell's 1861 expedition, his 16,000-mile journey across Asia and Oceania. This particular section describes an unexpected detour to the Tatra Mountains, which Russell had never planned to visit until reading about them in texts by a botanist named Balthazar Hacké. Russell traveled from Leipzig, Mainz, the very city where this fragment would be found over 150 years later, to Krakow, then to the Tatras. The account is full of Russell's typically flowery, detailed descriptions of the journey, the political situation, and the people he met. And then Russell reaches Zakopane, the gateway to the Tatras, where he hires a mountain guide. The guide's name is Clemens Bochelida. Our hiker keeps reading about their expedition into the mountains, about the peaks they climbed, the terrible weather they endured, about meeting a Swedish botanist named Göran Wallenberg, and then he reaches a passage that makes his blood run cold. Russell describes crossing a pass called Polski Hrebenby, the exact same pass where our hiker had seen the strangely dressed men. Russell writes about being ahead of his group for a moment, when he witnessed something that terrified him so much, he never told his companions. Let me read you exactly what Count Henry Russell wrote in 1861. But before I do, I want to know, have any of you ever experienced something in the mountains, or anywhere that you couldn't explain? Something that made you question what you just witnessed? Drop it in the comments, because what Russell saw is about to make this entire story collapse in on itself. Here's what Count Henry Russell wrote in 1861, describing what he saw at Polski Hrebenby Pass. A man was hurtling down the slope of the mountain, bouncing on each possible rock, at the speed of light. He had no alpenstock, but instead of that a metallic tool that shined in the sun like a thunderlight. Let me pause there. An alpenstock is a traditional wooden hiking staff. Russell is describing something metallic that reflects light, like lightning. In 1861, what would that be? Trekking poles. Modern aluminum or carbon fiber trekking poles. Russell continues. He was wearing curious orange clothes so bright that it hurt the eyes. Orange clothes. Bright, eye-hurting orange. In 1861, such vibrantly colored synthetic fabrics didn't exist. Dyes were natural and muted. But you know what is commonly bright orange today? Technical outdoor gear, soft shells, safety colors. Our modern hiker specifically mentions putting on his new orange soft shell at that exact location, Polski Hrebenby Pass. But it gets more specific. Russell writes, before he noticed us, he took something out of his pocket, from which a white fire went out. The man spoke for few seconds alone to his fire. White fire. Speaking to it. A phone screen. He was checking his phone, the same phone that had malfunctioned earlier, showing the year 1900. Russell watched a man from the future speaking into a glowing device. Then he watched into our direction, and noticed me with a look of amazement on his face. He shouted few words in a language that I could not understand, and looked at me with a sadistic smile. Remember our hiker's account? He saw 4 men in strange, archaic clothing. He called out greetings, Ahoj in Slovak, Dzień dobry, in Polish, Guten Tag, in German, to Russell, a Frenchman who spoke English and French fluently. These Slovak and Germanic languages would have been foreign and unintelligible in that moment. The sadistic smile. Maybe it wasn't sadistic at all. Maybe it was the uncomfortable, awkward smile of a confused person trying to be friendly to strangers who seemed oddly dressed. Russell's final line is chilling. He disappeared as fast as he came, running and bouncing on boulders, with the help of his thunderlight. I did not want to scare my friends, so I did not tell them I met the devil. Our hiker was moving quickly down the mountain. He was using trekking poles, winter light, to help him bounce efficiently down the rocky terrain. It's a common technique for experienced hikers. To Count Henry Russell in 1861, this was demonic, supernatural, an encounter so disturbing he kept it secret from his companions, including his guide Clemens Barcaldea and the young porters with them. Think about that. Russell was a sophisticated, well-traveled man. He'd explored extensively. He'd seen many things, but this shook him enough that he hid it from his trusted companions. Now let's talk about the other impossible details that line up. Our modern hiker remembers seeing 4 men. Russell was traveling in a group of 4 himself, his friends Saurine, Clemens Barcaldea, and young porters. Our hiker specifically noticed 1 man ahead of the others, dressed in tartan trousers, leather jacket, and carrying an ancient-looking rucksack. Russell was known for wearing Scottish tartan on his expeditions. It was part of his eccentric personal style. He would have been ahead, being the leader of the expedition, the wooden shelter that vanished. In 1861, that structure wouldn't have existed yet. The Tatras weren't developed for tourism. The modern trails, markers, and structures our hiker knew weren't there. The trail being narrower, less maintained, overgrown. That's exactly what a 19th century mountain path would look like. The fresh snow that appeared overnight. Weather in September can be unpredictable in mountains, but the forecast being completely wrong suggests our hiker might have been experiencing September weather from a different year, from 1861 perhaps, when Russell's expedition took place. Here's where I need your input, because this is where the rational explanations start breaking down. Comment below. What do you think happened at Polski Haraben? Was this a shared hallucination across time? A genuine time slip, where 2 periods briefly overlapped? An elaborate hoax using historical documents? A coincidence so statistically improbable, it seems impossible? Something else entirely? And here's another question. If you were our modern hiker, and you found this book fragment, what would you do? Would you try to verify it? Research it further? Or would you try to forget the whole thing? Because there's something we haven't addressed yet, and it's perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire case. If this encounter really happened, if these 2 men really saw each other across 150 years, then what does it mean about the nature of time in that location? And more importantly, how many other people have experienced something similar in the Tatras and never found their corresponding account? Before we dive into theories and try to make sense of this, I need to show you some additional details that make this case even stranger. Let's examine the elements of this story that are hardest to explain away, because there are details here that go beyond simple "he got disoriented and imagined things." First, the historical accuracy. Our modern hiker doesn't claim to be a historian. What's creamy to a modern hiker? Doesn't claim to be a historian. He's just someone who wanted a weekend in the mountains. Yet the fragment he discovered contains verifiable historical details. Count Henry Russell did travel extensively in 1861. Clemens Barcaldea, also spelled Kleinek, was a real person, one of the most famous Tatra mountain guides of the 19th century. Göran Wallenberg was a real Swedish botanist who studied the Tatras. These aren't made-up names, but here's what's truly fascinating. The book Fragment our hiker found shouldn't exist in current circulation. Russell wrote extensively about his travels, but his documented works focus heavily on the Pyrenees. His 1861 Asian journey is mentioned in biographical sources, but complete published accounts are extremely rare. The specific details about the Tatras portion, that's not in any readily available modern edition. So either our hiker stumbled upon a genuine rare historical fragment that's been lost to most archives. Someone created an elaborate forgery that matches Russell's writing style and includes accurate historical details. The document appeared as part of the same anomaly that caused the encounter. Before you decide which option you believe, consider this. Our hiker didn't buy the book. The shopkeeper was getting impatient, his wife was calling, and he only had time to read portions of it. He left the shop without purchasing the fragment. When he tried to return to that specific bookshop in Leipzig months later, he couldn't find it. The street was there. The surrounding shops were there, but the Alpine Buchhandlung was gone. Different shop in its place. He asked around and nobody remembered an Alpine bookshop on that street. Now, you might say, he misremembered the location. Leipzig has many bookshops. He got confused. But he remembered specific details: the suspicious old man with glasses, the smell of old books, the corner with international literature, the shopkeeper telling him it would close at 1 p.m., his wife being in clothing boutiques on the same street. Those are concrete, specific memories, not vague impressions. Let's talk about the Tanap Ranger. This is one of the most interesting details, because it suggests whatever happened wasn't total immersion in 1861. The ranger appeared in modern uniform, with modern equipment. He interacted completely normally. He knew the contemporary trail system, and pointed our hiker back to the current paths. The ranger existed in 2023, or whenever this occurred, not 1861. So what does this mean? If our hiker had fully slipped into 1861, he shouldn't have encountered a modern ranger. If he was fully in his own time, he shouldn't have seen Russell's group. It suggests something more complex than a simple time portal. Perhaps a overlap, a temporary blending, where both time periods existed simultaneously in the same space. Think about the geography for a moment. The Tatras sit on the border between Poland and Slovakia. Historically, this was the border between multiple empires: Austrian, Russian, Prussian. It's been a crossing point, a boundary, a liminal space for centuries. In folklore, boundary places are considered thin spots where the normal rules don't apply. Crossroads, mountain passes, border regions, these show up repeatedly in stories about strange phenomena. Polski Haraban is literally a border pass, a threshold between two countries, but maybe also between two times. Here's my question for you. Do you think certain locations can act as anchors for temporal anomalies? Have you heard of other cases where specific places seem to have repeated strange occurrences? Drop your thoughts and any similar cases you know about in the comments. There's one more detail I want to highlight before we move to theories. It's small, but it bothers me. Our hiker's phone malfunctioned and reset to January 1st, 1900 mind. The default date for many devices when they completely reset. But why 1900 specifically? That's 39 years after Russell's 1861 expedition. Is that just coincidence? A standard programming default date? Or is there something significant about the device trying to recalibrate to a time frame it wasn't designed for, and the year 1900 being the closest reference point it could find? Modern devices use GPS satellites and network signals to maintain accurate time. In a location where time itself might be unstable, what would a GPS device register? Error. Reset. Default to the earliest programmed date. It's a technical detail that actually makes the story more credible, not less. Someone fabricating this account probably wouldn't think to include the specific detail about the phone resetting to 1900. Now, let's dive into what might explain all of this minds, if anything can. Alright, let's be methodical about this. What are the possible explanations for what happened at Polski Hřeben Pass? Theory 1. Elaborate hoax. This is the default skeptical position. Our hiker fabricated the entire story, possibly created or commissioned the fake Russell document, and planted this narrative online or in research circles. Problems with this theory. What's the motive? The hiker hasn't monetized this story. No book deal, no documentary, no major media attention. If you're going to create an elaborate hoax, why not cash in? The historical details are too accurate. Creating a convincing Russell-style text with correct historical figures, accurate geographic details, and appropriate period language would require significant expertise. The bookshop disappearance adds nothing to the core story and actually makes it less believable. A good hoaxer would keep things simpler. That said, I can't completely rule this out. Stranger hoaxes have been perpetrated for less obvious reasons. Theory 2. Misidentification and coincidence. Maybe our hiker encountered historical reenactors or people doing period hiking. He got disoriented, misremembered details, and later found a book that somewhat matched his confused memories. His brain connected dots that weren't really connected. Problems with this theory. The specificity of the details. Orange softshell. Trekking poles. Phone with white screen. These are very specific descriptions that match modern gear. Exactly. Russell's account was written 150 plus years before modern technical outdoor gear existed. He couldn't have based his description on seeing modern equipment, because it didn't exist yet. The timing and location matched too precisely. Same mountain pass, same time of year, September, same basic scenario from opposite viewpoints. For this to be pure coincidence, the odds are astronomical. Theory 3. Shared psychological phenomenon. Some researchers have proposed that certain locations can trigger similar hallucinations or altered states in different people across time. Perhaps something about Polski Hřeben magnetic anomalies, infrasound, atmospheric conditions causes people to hallucinate similar experiences. This is actually a documented phenomenon. In some locations, certain caves, for instance, have magnetic properties that affect brain function. Some mountains produce infrasound that can cause feelings of unease and visual disturbances. But this theory struggles to explain. How would Russell in 1861 hallucinate technology that wouldn't exist for 150 years? Why would the hallucinations be so specifically reciprocal minus each man seeing the other with period-appropriate confusion? How does the bookshop discovery fit into this? Theory 4. Genuine time slip. This is the most controversial explanation, but it's the one that actually fits all the details. A time slip, as theorized by some researchers, is a temporary overlap or breakthrough between different time periods. Unlike time travel, which implies conscious control and movement, a time slip is an accidental, spontaneous phenomenon, where someone briefly experiences or interacts with a different time. Documented cases exist, though they're controversial. The Moberly Jourdain incident at Versailles, 1901. The Bold Street time slip in Liverpool. Multiple reports. Various cases in the Scottish Highlands. Reports from ancient sites like Stonehenge. The Tatras case would be unique, because it has potential verification from both sides of the slip. Both the person who slipped and a historical record of them being seen. Common elements in reported time slips. Sudden weather changes or fog, electronic devices malfunctioning, feeling of disorientation or unreality. Brief duration, minutes to hours, not days. Difficulty finding the location again afterward. Our hiker's experience checks every one of these boxes. Theory 5. Something we don't have a framework for yet. Maybe the answer isn't in any existing theory. Maybe this is evidence of something we don't have language or scientific framework to explain yet. Consider, before we understood quantum mechanics, the behavior of subatomic particles seemed impossible and contradictory. Before relativity, time dilation was unthinkable. Our understanding of reality has fundamentally shifted before when presented with evidence that didn't fit existing models. What if time isn't as linear as we experience it day to day? What if certain locations, under certain conditions, allow for what physicist John Wheeler called quantum foam effects minus, where the normal rules become flexible? I want to hear from you. Which theory makes the most sense to you? Or do you have a completely different explanation? Comment below with which theory you find most convincing, and why. Any similar experiences you've heard about or experienced. Whether you think this case deserves serious scientific investigation. And here's a thought experiment. If you could travel to Polski Cherubin, pass on a September weekend, when conditions match those our hiker experienced, would you want to investigate this yourself, or are some mysteries better left alone? Before we wrap up, there's one final aspect of this case we need to address minus, and it might be the most unsettling of all. Here's something that should keep you up at night. If this happened to our hiker, and if Count Russell documented it from the other side, how many other people has this happened to never found their corresponding account? Think about it. Our hiker got incredibly lucky. He stumbled into a used bookshop in Leipzig, in the exact city Russell traveled through. He happened to look at the international literature section. He happened to see Russell's name. The book Fragment happened to survive 150 plus years and end up in that specific shop. What are the odds of all those things aligning? It suggests that for every case like this, where we have documentation from both sides, there might be hundreds or thousands where we only have one side or no documentation at all. Consider the missing persons statistics for mountain ranges worldwide. The Tatras, like many mountain ranges, have their share of unsolved disappearances. People who set out on clear days with proper equipment and simply vanish. Some are found eventually, yes, bodies recovered years later in locations that were thoroughly searched multiple times. Others are never found at all. Search and rescue teams will tell you that mountains are dangerous, unforgiving environments. People fall, get disoriented, suffer medical emergencies. That accounts for most disappearances. But there's always a small percentage that don't make sense. Experienced hikers who disappear from well-marked trails in good weather. People whose bodies are found in impossible locations. Cases where belongings appear in previously searched areas. What if some of those people experienced what our hiker did, but never made it back to their own time? There's an account Mondesid, and I'll be honest, I can't verify this one. Mondes from a Tatra mountain rescue worker, who claims that in the 1990s, they found a disoriented hiker near Polski Cherubin, who insisted the year was 1952. The man was wearing clothing that matched that era, carried old currency, and seemed genuinely confused by modern equipment. He was taken to a hospital for psychological evaluation, and disappeared from the facility before any conclusive assessment could be made. Urban legend, probably. But it makes you wonder, if Polski Cherubin is a genuine weak spot in time, how many people have accidentally walked through it? In which directions? To when? Here's another disturbing thought. Count Russell was rattled enough by his encounter that he kept it secret from his companions. He wrote about it, yes, but in a book that was never widely circulated. He called the figure he saw the devil. What if other historical explorers had similar experiences, but never wrote them down at all? What if they dismissed it as altitude sickness, as a dream, as something better left unmentioned? Throughout history, There are accounts of strange figures in mountains, some described as spirits, demons, or supernatural beings. What if at least some of those accounts were actually glimpses of people from different time periods? The Grey Man of Ben Macdui in Scotland. The mysterious figures seen at high altitudes that mountaineers report. The shadowy forms in the Himalayas. Could some of these legendary sightings actually be time slips being described through the cultural lens of their era? So here's my final question for you, and I really want you to think about this. If you knew Polski Hryben Pass might be a location where time becomes unstable, what would you do? Would you actively seek it out to investigate? Avoid it entirely. Visit it but with specific precautions. Try to document and study it scientifically. Drop your answer in the comments, along with your reasoning. And one more thing. Have you ever been to the Tatras? Have you hiked Polski Hryben? If so, did you experience anything unusual? Even something small? Strange weather shifts, electronic malfunctions, unusual encounters, feelings of disorientation, even details that seemed insignificant at the time, might be relevant. This case remains unsolved. Our modern hiker has shared his account, but the bookshop has vanished. The book fragment is lost, and we have no physical evidence beyond his testimony. The historical documentation supposedly exists somewhere in that fragment, but without access to it, we can't verify the exact wording. What we're left with is a story that's either an elaborate fabrication, an impossible coincidence, or evidence of something that challenges our fundamental understanding of time and reality. The Tatra Mountains keep their secrets well, and somewhere, at a lonely pass called Polski Hryben, maybe Miney, as just maybe, the boundary between then and now grows thin on certain September days. If you decide to investigate, be careful. Time, as they say, is a one-way street. Unless you're in the Tatras, then all bets might be off. Before you go, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I cover mysterious disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and cases that challenge conventional explanations. If this case interested you, there's plenty more where this came from. And remember, the next time you're hiking in the mountains, and something feels off Miney, the weather changes unexpectedly, your electronics malfunction, the trail looks wrong, pay attention. You might be experiencing something that shouldn't be possible. But then again, Count Russell thought he met the devil on a mountain pass in 1861. He might have just met someone from the future. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay safe out there.